All right, welcome to Module 2, Bioenergetics and Metabolism. I know this is a module that scares a lot of you because you probably don't get as much of this. You probably don't have the background in this like you do some other topics that we'll talk about coming up. But it's extremely important for a couple different reasons. One is when you're working with athletes and active individuals, you're really training energy systems. You're training those energy systems to perform. So you need to really have a good understanding of the energy systems and which ones are used for specific sports. The second reason relates to dietary supplements. I'm sure you've been asked by your clients if a supplement works, and you need to be able to tell them the mechanism of action, if there is a mechanism of action for that particular supplement, and how that supplement fits into metabolism and these metabolic processes, and how it might actually work. The outline for this module is to look at the definition of terms. We're going to look at energy for cellular activity. We're going to look at the different types of athletes. We're going to talk about a needs analysis when you're working with athletes and how to determine what specific energy system is used for different sports. And we'll look at some muscle fiber types because that's where it all kind of, where the magic happens, if you will. You've got these energy systems, but they ultimately will allow for the production of energy so that these muscles can contract. And when we look at metabolism, the definition is basically it's the sum of all the total chemical processes that occur in the body. And we know we have anabolic reactions and catabolic reactions, where the anabolic reactions are where you take the smaller molecules and you build them up to larger ones. Like if we were to take individual amino acids and build that up to a protein, that would be an anabolic process. But in most of the cases in this module, we're going to focus on the catabolic reactions, and that's where you take larger molecules and break them into smaller ones, where we take glycogen and break it down to glucose to produce energy, where we take the fat, the triglycerides, and break those down for energies. These catabolic reactions are really what we're going to focus on in this module. When we take the fats, carbohydrates, and proteins and break them down to energy, that process is called bioenergetics. Bioenergetics is a common term that we use to describe taking the foods that we eat and producing energy with that. And before we jump into the next section, what I wanted to do is just briefly talk about the typical structure here of a cell, and realize that the image on the left is how you see it in most textbooks, right? Where you've got this circular cell and it's drawn to perfection. And the point I want to make here is that a couple of points here. There are a couple of important aspects to this cell that we need to know when we look at these metabolic processes. And one is the soup of the cell here, which is called the cytoplasm. Okay, the soup of the cell, which is the cytoplasm. And then we also need to know this little squiggly organelle here called the mitochondria, because these are the two main areas where these energy systems will take place, either in the cytoplasm of the cell or in the mitochondria of the cell. The next thing I want to describe here is realize that when we talk about a muscle cell, or the muscle cell is the same thing as a muscle fiber. It doesn't look like what you see in the textbook description here, like over to the left. Okay, a muscle fiber is long and cylindrical, and it runs the entire length of the muscle. Like if we were to take our biceps brachii, and there's a tendon on each end that connects it to the bone, but it runs the entire length. If we're looking at our biceps brachii, for instance, it originates up at the shoulder and then crosses the shoulder, goes down and crosses the elbow joint, but its main action is elbow flexion. But the point here is that the fiber runs the entire length of that muscle. So those are the key points that we need to know in the introduction before we jump into our next section. In our next section, we're going to look at the energy for activity, and we're going to talk a little bit about this molecule called ATP. See you in the next section.